In our last video, we talked about how technology is never a neutral tool. There's this oft-quoted line from Neil Postman's excellent, if slightly dated book, Technopoly, that after the printing press was invented, you didn't have old Europe plus the printing press. You had a different Europe.
Without the printing press, there would have been no Reformation. Luther's writings would not have spread.
Absolutely, and then going downstream a few hundred years, likely no Bruderhof.
Tragic thought. So, if technology is so formative, and if it has the power to shape us and our habits and how we relate to one another as adults, how much more is that the case when it comes to children? So, to me, it's kind of remarkable how often we take an adopt first, ask questions later approach when it comes to technology and kids.
Well, speak for yourself, because I personally grew up living without technology. I mean, it was the woods, and that's it. That is little to no access to television, right? Or computers, other than the very occasional movie night, which was a big event. Bruderhof schools are big on doing rather than watching. So there's an emphasis on things like unstructured play, gardening, exercise, handcrafts, and sports, in addition to regular academics. There are still no computers in Bruderhof school classrooms as far as I know, right?
But it wasn't always like that. I mean, we didn't have television either when I was growing up, but when I was in middle school here on the Bruderhof in the early 90s, kind of date myself, the school was an enthusiastic early adopter of personal computers, and I spent a lot of time playing games like Oregon Trail or putting our school magazine together in a really early version of Word, lots of clip art. And I also remember some epic Prince of Persia competitions in the classroom, which is like a really fun early computer game.
That's all Greek to me, but by the time I came along, computers were definitely out the window, and we were back to doing everything by hand. We published a handwritten magazine called Log Offline, which very clever, I thought, and we built a house out of straw bales. And every year, we would do this thing called 24 Hours Alone in the Woods, where you get in touch with nature. It was inspired by John Muir. I was absolutely frightened the first time I did it, but survived, and I was so happy about that. I guess they saw how you guys turned out, and they wanted something different for us.
Well, I definitely feel like I missed out on the John Muir experience. It sounds like a lot of fun. My daughter actually did something similar this year down at Fire Island on the beach, and mostly loved it, except for being terrified by the nighttime wildlife noises. I believe they were visited by some foxes. So figuring out how to strike the balance is tricky business. There are technologies that kids should absolutely be learning about. You know, your small engines, electronics, even music editing software, things that require problem solving and creativity. Because there's a lot you can learn about the physical world by having to manipulate it. I would even say, this might be a heresy, that video gaming to a certain extent, and depending on the game of course, can help develop certain skill sets. The distinction, I think, is whether an activity is passive or active and creative, and of course whether there is balance. Seeing kids on smartphones in constant touch with each other makes me reflect on my childhood, where there was lots of downtime, and learning how to use it was part of growing up. And I was often told by my parents when I complained, only boring people are bored.
It's a good one.
It is a good one. I use it on my kids. So while I think limiting children's use of technology and automation in general is smart, raising kids in a bubble with no access to it at all makes it more likely they'll have a harder time adjusting when inevitably they have to step out of childhood into adult life, whether that's university, working within the Bruderhof, or whatever path they take. There are pros and cons of technology for children, just like with us adults. So a certain degree of exposure and familiarity with developing technology is important. And then also awareness of the wider culture that you get through engaging with these technologies. I think it's healthy.
I agree with that 100%. So while Bruderhof kids don't have unfettered access to computers or digital devices at home or in the elementary and middle school, other than the occasional movie or some relevant educational content, in the Bruderhof high schools, the students have opportunities to use the internet in supervised research environments, because that's kind of just mandatory. And the high school is developing a curriculum to teach reliable and safe internet research. helping students parse content for trustworthiness. But we don't give kids personal devices and have no plans to go there, as far as I know. It's simply not necessary, and the negative effects of technology on child development are clear enough. Not to mention the potential for exposure to really unhealthy and immoral cultural influences.
Yeah, and a lot of these devices and apps are designed to be addictive, which addiction, not good.
Always bad.
The promise of this information technology, personal devices in particular, is that it makes our lives better, more efficient, and happier. We'll know more, or at least have access to a ton of information. There's an argument that it's actually making us stupider. We'll connect with more people, we'll be entertained, we'll be able to try new recipes. But when I ask myself the question whether my quality of life now is better than life without smartphones was, I think the answer is at best equivocal. One thing is I'm terrible with maps and directions, so GPS has been a life changer for me. But when I think about whether owning a smartphone would make my kids happier, the answer to that question is just a hard no. For now, they're just much better off climbing trees and milking cows and so on and so forth.
As Neil Postman puts it, it is important to remember what can be done without computers, and it is also important to remind ourselves of what may be lost when we do use them. The ability to just be, to observe nature, to create without distraction. In Ian Forster's novel, Howard's End, Uncle Ernst reproves his arrogant German nephew, telling him, "It is the vice of a vulgar mind to be thrilled by bigness, to think that 1,000 square miles are 1,000 times more wonderful than 1 square mile, and that 1,000,000 square miles are almost the same as heaven. That is not imagination. No, it kills it." Point being that if a child can learn to focus on their 1 square mile or what's directly in front of them, it's a real strength, I think.
Yeah, it's actually pretty intuitive that creating, whether it's growing things, building things, creating an imaginary world of your own in unstructured play, all of that is going to be better for a child's development than inhabiting worlds created by people with a profit motive. And another thing, a responsible parent only lets people they know and trust spend time with their kids. And that list for me doesn't include people like Mark Zuckerberg or Logan Paul or, God forbid, PewDiePie.
One thing I want to recognize at the end here is that many people are constrained by circumstances and often have no choice but to let their kids entertain themselves with an iPad. I mean, I don't want to sound like a preacher against technology.
No, that would be wrong. If you're in a city, for example, and there sometimes are no options. If there's one thing I learned during COVID tide, especially at the beginning when the weather was just nasty, it was how quickly technological puritanism starts to seem ridiculous when the choice is between 4 kids at each other's throats and Disney Plus. And as a side benefit, now my kids are Star Wars fans, so that's great, I guess.
Did they watch Hamilton?
No, we did not watch Hamilton yet.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and see you next time. And we were just really really proud of not having technology. So there was this song that we used to sing all the time. It goes like this. It was our school anthem. It goes, "We are the Woodcrest School, and we are proud to be free of drugs and alcohol, computers and TV." So equating computers and TV with drugs and alcohol.
With drugs and alcohol. Awesome.
That is awesome.
It's very subversive. I actually remember the chorus because my little sister was in the...
Right.
Goes... How's it go? Split a log, build a fire, Woodcrest School is getting higher.